Hi everyone, welcome to this session. We're in how to set up a home ed group or setting up a home ed group. So if you've come to the wrong one, this is your chance to save it and watch for later. So anyway, my name is Rachel. I'm sure some of you have seen me on Pathfinders and so on. We're just going to chat for probably about 20-30 minutes about setting up a home ed group. And I would really like to have questions and comments from you as well. So if you're able to do that during that will be fantastic. And hopefully I can respond to some of them as well. I have one kid asleep and two others busy, so fingers crossed I'm not interrupted, but there is that possibility of that happening, but I know you'll bear with me if that does. So yeah, we're talking about setting up a home ed group, and we're going to kind of talk a big picture things and some smaller kind of tips and tricks too, and that's where I would definitely like some input from you too. So I used to have a job actually after teaching, but before doing this, where my job was basically running a bunch of groups for schools, for community centres. And then I started home ed, and it was very kind of natural for me to think, right, I'm going to start a home ed group. I found it was worlds apart from the other groups that I'd set up. So I just wanted to share some of the mistakes that I made, some of the things that I've learned, and some of the kind of hypotheses I have about setting up a home ed group. So let's just define our terms before we get into it. I'm going to make that a little bit bigger. Hang on. Here we go. So I'm going to be talking about kind of everything from regular playtime with your friends, where it's just like every Monday afternoon, let's meet at the park down the road, to kind of a paid event that you're putting on for others. You might be an organisation, or you might need insurance, that kind of very formal setting, and everything in between. The two most common things that I see though are the themed groups, like a nature group, a science group, art group, or special events like a jumble sale. I know a home ed group down south was doing that recently, Christmas plays, not back to school picnics. So there's a lot of different places where we see those groups, and they happen in a lot of different places too. So online is a big one now that didn't used to exist. Obviously before COVID, people didn't really do that so much. Now that's happening. We have public places, parks, museums, and so on. Sometimes they're free, sometimes not. We have home as well as a place that you could have a home ed group. That definitely isn't as popular as it was before, but I wonder if that's going to start to increase a little bit more. Obviously hiring a space, or there's purpose-built places. You go and do dance in a dance studio. So it's kind of it's a big array of lots of different settings and ways that you can do a home ed group. So what I try to do is think of some bigger principles or kind of hypotheses that I want to share with you. Now, a hypothesis, as you know, it is an idea that can be tested, so it is not proven. So these are kind of opinions, I guess, that you might disagree with me. And again, pop that in the chat if you do, so that we can discuss it. And then I'll expand a little bit on there and throw in a few of the things that I've learned along the way. So when I sent out for like help for people to give me insight for this, I just wanted a lot of other people's experiences and advice. The first two messages that came said, don't do it. And I mean, they were kind of tongue in cheek, but actually there's a lot of truth to that, isn't it? I think if you've set up a home ed group before, you've probably been burned in some way, shape or other. Maybe you've been left holding the baby, either the costs for the place, maybe you just ended up having a lot of the responsibility. Maybe there's been conflict or people complaining, and there's a few people who are just like, I don't want to do it anymore. But even if you're not the one setting it up, this is my first hypothesis, that being an active part of a home ed community is a key factor in being able to effectively home ed long term. You might disagree with me. There might be some of you like, yes, definitely. So let me expand a little bit just in case you need a bit of convincing. This question comes up all the time. So for our kids, groups are important because they're the answer to this question. Every time it comes up, what about socialization? This is the way that we answer them. Well, we go to groups, we go to meetups. There's so much going on. There's a lot of stuff that we're involved in, and we know that that's a good thing for our kids. But what about us adults? And I guess that's more what I'm focusing on now, because I wonder if that's actually maybe even more important for us to have a good home ed community that we can be involved in, and the impact that that has on our kids. I think particularly maybe when kids are smaller and it's more about playing with friends rather than like building long-term friendships, I guess. It's a bit different, I guess, than with teenagers. So my focus is going to be a bit on us adults. And what it makes me think of is, this is not a very flattering picture, of when I had my first kid. And it was about the same time that now Princess Case had hers. And that is a picture of her 10 hours after giving birth. And that's the picture of me 10 hours giving birth. It was traumatic. I'd been in hospital 2 weeks already. I lost a lot of blood. He was small, but it was still a very happy time. But it was a shock to the system. You can see my American Patriot t-shirt that my husband thought would be funny for me to give birth in. But I'm just like, there's no way that I am going outside in a flowery dress getting my photo taken. And then I went home and it got even more of a shock to the system, having the baby, especially a premature baby. But people just hadn't told me stuff. Like, I didn't realize like how many places you leak from. No one had told me that. No one shared that stuff with me. And I had a community, but it wasn't quite the same as it wasn't really a community that was going to be there to support me during that time. And it was only when I actually found an online community that was really empowering for me that things changed. I felt less alone. I felt supported. I could ask questions. I could realize that the books that I was reading probably were about a very particular family in a very particular place and didn't apply to my situation. And it was those moments where at 3 o'clock in the morning, you're sending a message to someone and they're saying like, me too, I'm exhausted, I'm tired too. And I needed that. And I needed also people who are a little bit further ahead of me to talk about some of the things that might come, to give me a bit of perspective. We need that, don't we? And we need it in the home ed community. Just because we've exited out of mainstream settings doesn't mean we've exited out of community. So it is really important to be a part of a community, however that looks for you. This is my next hypothesis. And this is where we'll get a little bit more into kind of the nuts and bolts of things. So an effective home ed group is rooted in consent, collaboration, and creativity. So if you hear me do any other talks, you'll hear these words come up quite a lot because I see connections in a lot of things and I like alliteration. So I think an effective home ed group is first of all rooted in consent. So for me, consent is about, well, it's a happy yes. And that is important to do. That's to do with clear expectations. And this is something that when I sent out messages and asked people to give information, another thing that came back a lot from people was like, have clear expectations. In other words, what are we asking people to say yes to? Because if you are having a very structured session, you're going to be sitting down, you're going to need everyone kind of on board. Or if you need the parents to be there and be very active, people need to know what they're saying yes to, even just down to things like what's the toilet situation like. There might be things that you don't think are necessarily important for people to know, but the more clear we are with our expectations, with what the place is like, with what we're doing, then people can actually give consent. They can say yes to it and they're more likely to commit to it. This next one there is really... I'm going to be sharing some of my mistakes. And this is one of the mistakes I don't think people would have noticed, but internally caused me a bit of stress. So are our expectations of kids informed by school experiences? And what I was asking kids to consent to, or at least what I was hoping they would consent to, sitting down and listening to me in one of the groups particularly that I led, I think that was a wrong expectation. And now I didn't make a big deal of it when I was leading the group and talking, teaching about things. Internally, I was getting stressed out. And internally, I felt like this isn't successful. People aren't listening to the explanations I'm putting in. Like one kid standing on their head, and it's probably my kid as well. And it just like, I had the complete wrong expectations. And like I said, I didn't verbally put that out, but it made me feel like stressed out because of it. And it's because I still had that school experience in my head. I don't know if you've ever told a group of home ed kids to line up, But if they've never been to school, they have no idea what you mean. And it's like herding feral cats. It's a complete different kettle of fish. So if you were running a group, make sure your expectations of the kids and what you're asking them to say yes to isn't rooted in your school experience. And then this one, can you create space for the no and the not yet? That might be literal space. So if you do have, like, this is going to be very structured, we're going to be sitting down and listening. Do you have space for the family where 2 of their kids will be like, yep, that's great, but 1 kid couldn't handle that? Do you have physical space that they can go to? But I'm also thinking about another comment I got a lot from people, which is the whole kind of preschooler debate. You know you're going to home ed, but your kids aren't compulsory school age yet, but you still want to build a community, and that is really valid. You still want to be making friends. You still want your kids to be making friends. You want people with a shared mindset. But then you go to these home ed groups who say, actually, no, this is only for compulsory school age kids, or the only little ones are like younger siblings. And that might be the expectation that you have. But can you create space for those families, either physically or relationally? Could you say, look, this group isn't for you, but let's set up a group that could work for just preschooler kids? Or, hey, do you want to meet in a park and we'll build a relationship and talk about things and still be open for that? So there are different ways of creating space for people who can't yet consent to the expectations that you have. Just looking here, someone's commented, Lorna has commented, community for parents is a huge motivation for me when I organise groups. Absolutely. That, I think, is one of the main reasons that a lot of us do it. We get lonely and we want friends. So let's move on to creativity, isn't it? So, collaborate. And again, I'm going to share some mistakes that I made. So collaborate, working together. And this is something that Lorna, who just commented there, talked to me about as well, how there are things that she is really good at leading groups, but one thing she isn't good at is advertising it or reminding people about it. So she has other people help her do that. I used to think, look, it's just easier if I do it myself. So I used to run an outdoor nature group, and then the weather changed. I was like, let's get inside and let's have like everything themed and linked to it, literacy table and numeracy. And I made, like, honestly, I think I put more effort into it than I did in like doing my own wedding. Like, I had DIY place cards that I'd made, I had posters up that I'd like handwritten. Every week I was setting up all of these amazing activities. Like, they were really good, but it was way too much to do myself. But I just was like, oh, it's easy to do myself. Oh, I'll go and set up myself. And at the end, when people are like, oh, can I help and clear up? And I'm like, oh, no, you just go, that's fine. And if COVID hadn't have happened, which stopped the group, I would have been burnt out very, very quickly. So it is not easy to do it yourself, especially in the long term. And then this is another mistake that I made. I think the only way, my opinion is that the only way you can be really inclusive, like genuinely inclusive, is if you collaborate with other people and people who don't have the same needs as you. So when I set up the group that I just mentioned, on social media, I was like, hey, if people have additional needs, can they like send me messages and talk to me about what helps them feel more welcomed in a group? And I was quite proud of myself for doing that. And I got responses. And because of that, I was like, okay, I'm going to make sure I have a quiet room set up in the side. So if kids need to or parents need to, they can use that space. And that's just going to be a quiet room. And I thought, like, check, I've done it. But then I like wildly advertised this group and tons of people signed up to come, which meant those people who needed that quiet space were just put off completely from coming because it was so busy. They're like, yeah, my kid isn't going to cope with that. We're not coming. And they were like, no one was mean about it. But I realized that I hadn't really collaborated with people. I'd like ticked a box and asked them a question, ticked a box and thought, yep, we're inclusive, but I hadn't collaborated with people. And so if you want an effective group, you need to genuinely work with people who are different than you, have different needs than you, so that you're able to make sure that everyone feels welcome. Just checking to see if we've got any comments. Okay. So, and also if you put questions in afterwards, if you're watching this on catch up, we'll still be able to answer and come back to it, or we'll be able to get in touch with you and give an answer. So creativity was the other key thing I thought to have an effective home ed group. And for me, I was spending a lot of that on preparation instead of on people. And this is kind of a mantra that I keep saying to myself. I would rather spend my energy on people than preparation. So if I've got extra energy to put into my home ed group, I should spend that on having conversations with people, on meeting up with people maybe at other times, following up with people, building relationships, rather than cutting out beautiful posters to put on the wall. And so when I talk about creativity, I don't necessarily mean that kind of DIYing. I mean in kind of how we solve those problems. So for location, for example, can you think of somewhere very different than you normally would have your group? Content, could you just borrow or use resources like from Twinkl that could help you get your content out without you having to put all that extra work in yourself? Timing, does it have to be in the morning or the afternoon? Could you do it in an evening? Would that work better? What about volunteers? So one thing that I've done is on my neighborhood WhatsApp group, I was feeling brave one day and I just sent out, hey everyone, just to let you know, we're home educators. I run this group. Would anyone like to be involved? And so we've got someone signed up who wants to do a graphic design workshop for us. We've got someone who wants to come and do some cooking, and a few other people who are really keen to get involved. And so being creative in how you have people help you is really, really helpful. And purpose, that I think sometimes we can think, well, it's to teach our kids this, or it's for our kids to socialize, but we might want to flip it and think, oh, is there a way we could set up a group where we're teaching other people or volunteering or serving somewhere? So I think the more creativity you have in solving some of the logistical problems, the more impactful that your home ed group is going to be. Let's skip to the next one. This is my third hypothesis. And I'm going to thank Lorna for a lot of the kind of examples for this, because I found what she shared really helpful and reminded me how important this is. Groups that have strong partnerships with organisations outside the home ed community are more impactful. Like I said, we exit out of the mainstream system, but we're not exiting out of community. And I actually found, because one of the criticisms I got from people when I started home educating was, well, you're just like leaving community activism, you're not wanting to help people, you're just kind of, if you're home educating, it must mean that you're staying away from community and you're no longer involved in making a difference. And I found the absolute opposite to be true, because I see a lot more of community. There's a lot more life happening outside of school. And if we're able to get involved with the people and the organizations that do that, it makes running groups a lot easier. So here's some, actually I'll go back, I'll tell you about the group that I'm involved in now. So I was going to a food store where they were selling like overstock and so on. And they had a food bank, warm space, and I was regularly going there during COVID to chat to people there. Eventually started volunteering. My kids went to the holiday club that was run there. And then now we run our home ed group in partnership with that organisation, with that community centre. So they provide the space, they provide all the art equipment and things like games equipment that we might need. And we're able to help volunteer in cleaning up spaces, in making sure that we're building relationships with the people who are using the food bank. And some of us use the food bank as well. And so it's a very different way of setting up a group than I've previously done, a lot more organic and not as I'm a bit of a control freak. And I guess I've had to let control go a little bit. But it's meant that it's kept on going. Even the weeks my kids had scarlet fever for what felt like 3 years. But for the kind of 6 weeks that everyone was ill, the group still kept going. There wasn't it didn't rely on me. Here are some other examples of people in the home ed community and what they're doing now with other partnerships. So a games club, so working with the library found funding for new board games because a home educator asked them to, and they provide the room use. So that's a games club, very easily set up because of that collaboration. A STEM club, so an organisation sponsors the group, so pays for the room hire and resources and guides them and ideas and so on. A farm school, so a home ed group set up because of a partnership with a local farm, and so they kind of have a really rich learning experience because of that. Nature reserves, so a lot of people go to nature groups, but going somewhere where they already have kind of an education centre and just informally building up relationships so that you can use the things there. An allotment club is one that I was in, so an overgrown allotment was given over to a home ed group to be able to work on. So obviously there's mutual benefits there. And then in the club as well that I was talking about earlier, for a long few months we would have 2 members from a charity kind of council initiative that would come and run games every week for an hour for the kids that wanted to join in. They learned a lot about the home ed community, and we were able to just step back a little bit and let them do it. And it meant that we could sustain things a lot longer. All right, hypothesis 4, and this is where we'll end. And it's more of a gentle challenge, I guess, which is if everyone looks like you, your home ed will grow wide but not deep. In other words, you might have lots of numbers of people coming, but the depth of understanding, of compassion might be limited in how it could grow. And I just want to talk about my Dungaree Theory, which feels ironic because I'm currently wearing my dungarees. But this is my Dungaree Theory. When I moved to this area, there's a big long road, and it's one of those roads where the name changes as it goes along, but it's still that same long road. And we used to live at one end, and then you can get the bus and go straight down to the other end. And it was very soon after moving here that I realised that as you move from my end down to the other end, the home educators start wearing dungarees. The further along you go, the more dungarees that you see. And in fact, I didn't even own a dungaree until we moved further to the centre of that road. And it's those kind of differences that are important to notice because they point to other things. So one way that you can make sure that a group grows deeper rather than wider and make it more diverse is thinking about where you're having it. So along this road, race changes. We have more brown people on one end, more white people at the other end. Religion changes, income changes, accessibility, where the buses stop, just very practical things change depending on where you live along this road. So wherever you set your group up is going to be impacted by that too. And so just going back to that, if you choose somewhere or if you're involved in groups where everyone looks like you, then my gentle challenge is maybe rethinking some of those logistics so that even though it might get messier, even though it might be harder, even though there might be more relational stuff to work through because people are complex, and the more different people you have, the more complexities you throw in there. That's where I think the real growth is going to happen. Now, feel like I talked a mile a minute there. I recognise most of you will hopefully be having either out with your kids, maybe having a sneaky afternoon nap. So if you want to ask questions later, you can go on our email address. There's ways in the comments as well that have been put there. And you can get in touch with me on the Facebook group or put your comments below and I will get back to you as well. So anyway, thank you so much for listening. I'll personally see you around 5 o'clock today for Today at the Conference. Don't forget as well, if you haven't, to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Anyway, thank you so much for watching and we'll see you next time.